Safeties are so hard to evaluate. Let's evaluate one. Let's talk about Lewis Cine on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. Show is on Twitter at Locked On Vikings, and thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day each and every day. Make sure you check me out on Patreon as well, patreon.com/Luke Braun NFL, where you can find the history documentary. And hey, some other cool stuff is going to happen in season on that Patreon page as well. So go check it out and love it if you join me. Let's talk about Lewis Cine today. Big news of the day, the Vikings actually did make 5 cuts. We will talk about that closer to the end of the show. I'll let you know who those are. And if you need to care about it, spoiler alert, probably not. But really, I want to get into Lewis Cine. I studied the hashtag, I hashtag grinded the tape, and decided to look a little deeper at Lewis Cine's game. I got a question about him on yesterday's mailbag episode, and I kind of said, yeah, it kind of looked a little slow, like he was reacting to what he's seeing and not what he's like anticipating. And I think that undersells it a lot. There's a lot more to his game that on a closer look I wanted to tell you about. Part of this came from, there's a video brought to my attention from Football Scout, I think, on YouTube, which I really like his videos. I've been watching his videos for a long time, pointed out a couple things, and then I noticed more patterns kind of that like made me go dive back in, and I noticed more patterns. So here's the thing. It's not there yet, but I can see it. That's going to be the headline with Lewis Cine. It's just not quite exactly all the way there, but you can really, really see where it's headed. And when I think of like draft picks that busted, like I remember watching Wyatt Davis last offseason. I don't think Wyatt Davis is making the team this year. In fact, I think he's like a mile away from the roster. But last year I wanted to see it so bad, and you just couldn't see it. You could see some flashes of athleticism and stuff, but you couldn't see where it was headed. You saw a lot of not really knowing what he was doing, and you didn't see where it was headed. I see it with Lewis Cine. I see the not anticipation, but just that sort of instinctual ability. He seems like he's pretty assignment sound. There were a couple of problems on the back end that I can't really tell whose fault is what, because I'm not familiar enough with the coverages, and also sometimes you just can't. You just can only really know if you're in the room. But yeah, there were like a couple of things that might be on him, or it might have been on someone else, and I just won't know. But even that, like for a preseason debut, they were rare enough for me to be pretty happy with that. And then there was just a lot of like the way he moves and flows from one part of a play to the other, the way he navigates traffic, the way he keeps blocks, all of them. I would say the biggest strength of Lewis Cine that I noticed in this Raiders game was that he proved very difficult to block. That's very helpful, especially in 3 safety packages, which is really where we're going to see Lewis Cine, because you don't want Lewis Cine to have to be one of the high safeties every single time you do 3 safety. Probably the best version of the 3 safety package will be Harrison Smith, Cam Bynum, Lewis Cine. Those are your 3, and you have Harrison Smith in the box, and then you have Bynum and Cine playing 2 high safety, and then Harrison Smith acting as like a linebacker, so it'd kind of be a big nickel, right? So you'd have Harrison Smith either act as a nickel, or you would have him sort of replace a will linebacker and line up that way, and then be part of like the run fit or be part of a blitz package, be a really good third down look, right? Where instead of putting, I don't know, Brian Asamoah on the line of scrimmage, you put Harrison Smith. That's where I think the usefulness of that look comes in. But if you can have Lewis Cine be part of the run fit, and he is so excited to be a part of the run fit, like you can see, like you can tell he is like very, very, very ready to get into the run fit, almost too much, which put a pin in that. But He's very willing in the run game, and because proves so difficult to block, you can put him in the box. And if you can put Cine in the box and feel good about it, you can put Harrison Smith in the box and feel good about it. Regardless of how you feel about Cam Bynum in the box, you're in that 3 safety package. You can do something like a safety rotation. Now, when I'm talking about him being a very willing run defender, it's not just an effort thing. Like, the effort is fine, but it's not. I'm not talking about an effort thing. I'm talking about how quickly he triggers into the run game. Um, and some safeties will be a lot more hesitant to do that, not for like a fear of contact or like a mentality or anything like that, but because of just how much they're focusing on like run versus pass. And I think Lewis Cine has the dial turned a little bit too much toward, kind of biting on the first candy that he sees. There is one play in like middle of the first quarter where he like bites really, really hard on play action, and he doesn't get back to his assignment soon enough. And the quarterback, I want to say Jarrett Stidham. By the way, I said that wrong. Someone DM'd me yesterday. I said Will Greer was beating out Nick Mullins. Jarrett Stidham is beating out Nick Mullins in Las Vegas, and Nick Mullins might be on the trade block. My bad on that. But either way, it was, I believe, Stidham who didn't see it, but there was a very open receiver because Lewis Cine just bit too hard on play action. Now, you teach run first. Like, it has to be run first. And that's not like a prioritization thing. It's a temporal thing. Run plays develop faster than pass plays, and so defenders will always be coached to lend their first two steps to the run, because if it is a pass, you probably have a little bit more time to make it up if you're wrong about that. So usually the first couple steps will be run fit. So if you trigger downhill a little bit, that's fine. And in fact, very good. But Lewis Cine went way too deep into that, way too close to the line of scrimmage, and then he couldn't actually take his like whole responsibility, rat or lurk or whatever you want to call it. And there was an open receiver over the middle. Jarrett Stidham didn't find it. Pretty sure he got sacked on that play. But that is sort of the thing you get yourself in trouble with, and that's the kind of mistake you haven't seen from Cam Bynum. Now, while I'm here, Cam Bynum has not been perfect. He's overrun some things. He's overplayed some hands, and there is definitely an opening to take that job. But I would say right now I've noticed more mistakes from Cine than I have from Bynum. So if I had to start a game tomorrow, I would probably start Bynum over Cine. But if I had to guess who plays more snaps this year, I'd be a lot less confident about that. And that's where we're at. I'm not done talking about Lewis Cine, but I do want to give you a little bit of an edge here. So I want to introduce you to the Elias Game Plan app. It's the ultimate sports betting and fantasy companion app for the NFL, NBA, and MLB. It's like a research app. It's a database of all sorts of stats, head-to-head comparisons, and insights from Elias Sports Bureau's research team. It's your one-stop source for player news and stats and records, analysis for betting or building a fantasy team, a daily fantasy team, or just impressing your friends by dropping a whole bunch of stats and knowledge. And that's what Locked On Vikings is all about, is making you better at making your friends feel stupid. It's great for getting all of your Grambles and your fantasy stuff in line. So go download the Elias Game Plan app today. NFL season's right around the corner. You can find the Elias Game Plan app in the App Store or the Play Store. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. Look, it's fantasy draft week. We got all sorts of fantasy resources here at the Locked On Podcast Network, Locked On Fantasy Football, Locked On Dynasty, and we're bringing you daily top 10 lists for fantasy draft week. I also want to point you to my Patreon, patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL, where you can find the history of the Minnesota Vikings. Part 1 through 3 is up. Part 4 comes up this weekend. And if you are a patron, you can see it Friday. And if you're a regular person, you got to wait a whole extra day. So come on over. Join me on Patreon. Let's keep talking about Lewis Cine. So part of evaluating safety play is understanding it's not really going to be about what happens when they're targeted or who is targeted, right? It's more going to be about the effect that it has on the rest of their teammates. And this is where I assign a lot more responsibility to safeties than something like PFF does. PFF will sort of punt on safeties a lot when they say, the safety didn't do anything. They were deep and the pass went short, so they didn't do anything, and we'll give you a 0 or a, whatever their neutral is for safeties. And I don't really do that as much because I think if a safety out of position makes a corner's job way harder, right? If you're supposed to get inside help from your safety, you're going to play the rep differently. You're going to play a route differently. You're going to utilize the sideline that much more or that much less depending on what kind of help you have. And if that help doesn't arrive, you're going to look like an idiot. You're going to play with a bunch of outside leverage thinking you're going to get help on the inside, and then the help isn't there, and suddenly you look like you played it totally wrong, and you got clips going up on all of the receiver school Twitters saying how good that route was and how much it juked you out of your shoes, when really you were playing it thinking you had help somewhere else. And so I see a lot of that because PFF or the SISs and stuff will assign yards or catches or whatever to whoever the closest defender was. That's probably the corner. And I tend to kind of see, be a little bit more active, I guess, in evaluating a safety and be like, well, the help wasn't where it was supposed to be. With that in mind, I thought Lewis Cine did a really good job of giving help where he was supposed to be. I'm still fuzzy, and this is going to be a learning year. I mean, every year is a learning year. If it's not a learning year, you're doing this wrong. But this is especially going to be a learning year for me in a Fangio-style defense. I'm really unfamiliar with it. I have what I kind of learned this offseason, but hey, we're all going to learn together. That's why you copy off me in math class. I'm not teaching the class. I'm learning right with you, and you can just copy my homework. Watching Cine in this, though, it's very clear he knows where he's supposed to be, at least in the coverages I can especially recognize. But even if in the ones I can't, there's no indecisiveness. There's not a lot of hitching and hesitating. He is late to react to some things. He's late to adapt to things. And he's triggering a little too hard at what he sees. But that's a developmental step that comes after you hesitate and you're thinking really hard and you're overthinking everything. He's past that, and he's going to the part where you're, seeing it all and sort of playing it all a little too fast and loose. And then it just becomes a matter of comfort and timing and familiarity. Let me give you one example. It comes from the first drive again, where he is playing half quarter, which is what you would think of it as cover 6. Some people call it cover 8, forget the name, but understand that it means you are playing halves. So think of cover 2, but cut cover 2 in half. And that is on the passing strength of the formation. So where there's more people, they're playing cover 2, and where there's less people, they're playing quarters. So half, quarter. Understand? So Cine is on the backside of that, which means he's in the quarters side. So he has a cover 4 zone, a deep inside part of that half of the field, and nobody comes to him. So it becomes a look for work situation where you go, okay, nobody's in my zone. What can I help, right? And so he sort of drifts over to help, give a little bit of inside help to the corner on the other side of him. I think it's Booth. And then he sees an over coming across into his zone, and he very deftly kind of drifts back over to that side. And he actually manages to give 2 different players help in the same play, which when your job is to look for work and you found 2 jobs, that's awesome. So that's the kind of rep you're going to get a real good pat on the back for on the Monday film session, even though I don't think it did anything. I don't think that side of the field was even targeted, but it's still that, so it didn't come up in any of the stat sheets or anything, but you can see that sort of, it was the one where he scrambled and then Cine was kind of up on him and he got a 5-yard scramble. When I watched that live, my thought was, he looked a little late to that, but watching it on all 22, he just was doing it. His job was different, and his job kept him very deep because he was in a deep quarter zone. So of course he was late to that. He was playing deep. He shouldn't be shallow on that. That's a really, really encouraging thing too, because it shows a lot of field awareness. You're looking at everything, you're reacting to everything, and he commits really, really hard to everything. It's a little scary when you commit that hard to everything. You can get got, right? You can get caught biting on double moves and stuff. But seeing the field in that way is sort of the hard part, and then just honing exactly what you see and what you react to and how hard you react to it is a dial you can kind of freely fiddle with. You got to be able to see it, though, and Lewis Cine sees it. That's where we should be very encouraged. It's not all there. And what he needs to do, I guess, to usurp Cam Bynum is, I suppose, what has to be the next topic of conversation here. But first, let me talk to you about a good old Gramble. BetOnline.net is the one-stop shop for all things Grambling. You could have bet on this preseason game. You can bet on the 49ers preseason game, which is a very exciting thing that you maybe want to do. You can bet on any regular season game. Week 1 against the Packers, got it. Week 4 in London against the Saints, you can gramble on that right now. Or any other game anybody else is playing in all the regular season. You can bet on WA, MLB. Both of those are starting to enter their playoff hunts a little bit. You can gramble on golf, tennis, MMA, whatever you want. Just find all of that at betonline.net, where the game starts. So part of what helps me evaluate players is kind of thinking from the perspective of, what if I had to coach him? What would I tell him? And I think right now, even though it's going to be my amateurish look at that, but it helps me sort of think through this in a more qualitative way instead of just going, he's 40th, and I give him 6 pluses and 3 minuses. Like, I'm not going to do that. That's how I did things for a couple years, and this is better. But with Cine, what I would try to get to him right now is to just get him to be a little bit more controlled. But the challenge, and this will be a challenge for like Durante Jones and Ed Donatel, who Donatel's a DB coach too, so he's got a lot of help in his corner for this, is going to be getting him to control how he commits to things and getting him to not like overplay his hand without causing him to be hesitant. Hesitation as a safety is death. If you start being hesitant, if you start second guessing what you see, guys will just start running past you. That's death. You cannot start, you can't break his confidence so much that he starts to second guess and be hesitant. You just have to get him to, okay, take two or three steps toward that, but still be aware if it's a fake. And I'm thinking a lot about that play action rep, but I see it a lot in like when he is committing to things, whether he's right or wrong, you kind of go, man, he really found that over route, and the Raiders did a decent amount of this where they would have some kind of clear out route on one side of the field, and then they would have somebody running an over route from that side of the field to the other side of the field, kind of hoping that they'll catch a safety being too deep. It's a really good like quarters beater kind of concept if you aren't having your safety poach or lurk, and Lewis Cine was lurking, so he would be able to pick that up, and he would be all over it. He would commit really, really hard to it. But if that's the kind of thing that sits down, if that's the kind of thing that's supposed to occupy him, so something can go behind him, like against something like Mills, which is a route concept that's a dig and then a post kind of wrapping around it, so it's supposed to put that particular person in conflict, and you want, as the offense, you want him to see that dig and say, ooh, that's mine, I'm going to go pick it off, while a post runs behind him, and you never saw it. So I worry about how much he's like committing. But I don't want to say, hey, don't commit to things and actually be hesitant a lot, right? Like that's why I'm not a coach. I probably wouldn't be very good at it. But like that's going to be the challenge of getting Lewis in. Once Lewis Cine is playing with a little tighter control, where if he does react to something and he is wrong, he's going 3 steps into it before he adjusts instead of 8 steps into it before he adjusts. Then we got a stew cooking. Before we go here, let's talk about the quick news of the day. The Vikings cut their roster. Everybody cut their roster from 90 to 85, so that's 5 players that had to be cut. We had a few injury situations that were sort of working out. 2 injury situations. Tyree Stevenson and Thomas Hennigan both had injury situations. They will likely revert to IR if they are not claimed on waivers, which I doubt they will be. Tyree Stevenson was pretty bad, and Thomas Hennigan was doing like a little okay, but I'm pretty sure he's like wide receiver 10. I don't know if anybody wants that in their camp rosters right now. So probably they revert to IR, or you let them go with an injury settlement if you didn't decide you're not going to keep them on IR and bring them back for a futures deal or whatever. So I could see both of those things happen with those guys. Also, Ty Smith, the cornerback, was waived with a vested veteran like contract termination that is different word for he was cut. The only difference is that it means he doesn't hit waivers, so there's no like waiver claim process for Ty Smith. He's just immediately to free agency, where everybody else you get a waiver wire. And then the only other two were Andre Mitzi, who I thought was pretty bad in camp. I only noticed him a couple times, and they were pretty bad, so that didn't shock me a lot. Maybe it's because he wore number 31 and he was trying to be an edge rusher. I mean, that's doom, right? And then Jake Bargas, which actually does surprise me. And that's the only one I think is really worth discoursing about a little bit, because the Vikings have been drilling lead plays, and lead plays are plays with fullbacks, with lead blockers. They've been drilling that with Ham and Bargas a lot. Bargas has gotten a lot of run over camp, just being the fullback on both the second and third teams. They used a lot of time and reps on Jake Bargas, and so I kind of thought, okay, we're going to have the default situation where Jake Bargas is your backup fullback, and you can probably stash him on the practice squad and have him be your backup fullback and elevate him in the event CJ Ham gets injured. That's what the last couple seasons have done. And with this new regime, I kind of figured looks like they were doing the same thing. So cutting Jake Bargas here is fairly surprising. That said, that doesn't necessarily preclude any of these guys. I mean, these guys can all go on the practice squad if they don't end up signing with another team. And so you can still put Jake Bargas as your practice squad fullback. If they don't, I would still probably expect someone to be that. Or are you giving this to like Zach Davidson or something, right? You could kind of accidentally sneaky stash a backup fullback on your roster that's not actually playing that job, but could do it in a pinch if you lost CJ Ham, and then you keep one fullback, use your practice squad on something else. That might be what they're doing, or we just end up with Jake Bargas on the practice squad anyways, and it's like, yeah, we've seen enough of Jake Bargas. We know what he is. We know what he can do. We're going to give everybody else the reps. You can relax for the rest of camp, Jake, and we'll see you on the scout team in September. Like, that is also totally a thing that could happen. So, I don't know. Something to watch if you're super into the minutia there, but for now, the first 5 cuts are never going to be too earth-shattering. No idea what's going to happen tomorrow on the Locked On Vikings podcast. It's probably going to be something nerdy, because that's what we do here. I'll see you for whatever that is. Check me out on Patreon. Check out the Minnesota Football Party. You can find that on the Locked On Minnesota Sports podcast feed. I will see you all tomorrow. And as always, Skull.